Hey everyone, Jason from Alphatone Audio back again today. And what I want to do today is I'm going to start the first in a new series of videos where I just simply take a plug and I assemble it. I want to do that for a couple of reasons. One, just to show you some of the variations and all the different parts out there, and hopefully you'll find a part that you didn't know about and something that maybe fits your needs a little bit better. And secondly, there's a few things I do no matter what I'm doing, as far as like what I'm assembling, that I always do on a regular basis. Just some basic guidelines I use whenever I'm assembling anything to make sure that I have a high degree of confidence knowing that you've got the best termination on a cable and plug combination that you can. And I also tend to modify plugs just a little bit, so I just want to show you as many examples of that as I can. So today I want to start off, and these are the right angle Pancake TRS plugs from GLS. And I got these on Amazon. These are super cheap, and we're going to find out why in the course of this video. You get 20 of these plugs for just $30. So I had a customer come to me recently and needed a whole bunch of these cables, but he was on a really tight budget. And normally I would use like a Switchcraft 236 for something like this, but that was just out of his budget for this. So when I suggested, we give these a shot, he said okay, and the job turned out fine, and they were okay with the cables and everything. But I don't know if I would actually use something like this in one of my standard products. And again, like I said, through the course of this video, I'll show you why. There are two main things that you need to know about these plugs. And the first one is, I noticed a lot of inconsistency in these as I was opening up, and you just see the tabs. There's two tabs on here. This is the tip, and this is the ring, and you would just take the shield of your cable and just solder it into the body. I noticed that the tabs were just always kind of came out of different places, even if just by a little bit. They didn't come straight out. And generally, especially on this ring tab, whenever I see it starting close to the body, that just means it's that much closer to shorting out, which obviously I don't want. So normally the ones that were just like really offset, I tend to not use those ones, and I use the ones that lined up a little bit straighter. Usually at 6 and 9 o'clock is where I wanted to see these. The other thing is, I got this one, and it ended up being totally broken and free spinning and just very not stable at all. Now, again, these are not super expensive parts, and this didn't bother me so much and I'm not going to bother returning just one of these, right? And this is the first time I ever bought these plugs, so maybe this is just a rarity and you don't really see this, but all I'm going to say is my experience, I didn't really feel good about the quality of these overall. And another thing about these, if you look at the insulators between the individual connectors, they're really, really cheap. It looks like they could just crack and fall apart at any moment, especially if you get it, if it's does that when it's plugged in, and when these cracks, and you have a problem like getting that plug back out because it's now blocking the plug from coming back out, and you have to disassemble your thing. It's happened to me a couple times on various things, right? So that's not something I usually look forward to. So definitely had a couple quality problems. So two main things you want to know about these plugs. First one is buy more of these than you need. Like I said, 20 to a bag, at least how I bought them. If you happen to need exactly 20, you may want to pick up 2 bags, just so make sure you have enough good quality plugs. The second one is, as I said, you would normally take, there's no dedicated pin for the shield of your cable, which is fine. You just solder to the body. Whatever they use for the coating on these plugs does not like to be soldered onto. And you notice that the solder just balls up and doesn't really want to stick. So you're going to have to do an extra bit of cleaning on these to make sure that you get a really, really good ground connection. So I'm going to build this one today. So before I open this up, talk about one of the things that is nice about these is the maximum outer diameter on the cable that you can use these plugs is actually pretty large. I'm going to be putting this Mogami 2552 microphone cable on this today, and this is like their medium grade cable. And even when you put it in, you can tell that it's not really being grabbed onto by these strain relief ridges on here. If you look at the Mogami 2549, which is their super heavy duty microphone cable, you really need to go to that large of a cable to the point where it really starts to, when you just insert the cable like this, where you can actually kind of feel the strain relief tabs hitting it. And even then, it's not providing a lot of strain relief. I would still probably want to put some heat shrink on this just to make sure that I really get some good strain relief on that. So even on this, as I'll show you later, I'm going to do 2 layers of heat shrink on here just to make sure that I'm getting as much strain relief as possible. So now when we open this up, just 2 Phillips head screws on there. Now I know how I'm going to assemble this. Like I said, this tab over here is the tip, this is the ring, and I'm going to do the ground over here on this side of the body. I'm not exactly sure, but I want to definitely clean this off a little bit. And there's a couple things you can do. You could get in there with a Dremel tool if you wanted. You could even get like a piece of sandpaper, maybe something like 120 grit, wrap it around a screwdriver and get in there. Or if you have a file or even just a screwdriver, all you have to do is just really scratch this off. So I'm going to start working this now and take about a good 20-30 seconds, and don't be romantic about this. Really get as much of that stuff cleaned off. And as you start to scrape this nickel off, you'll see copper colored metal underneath. So I'm going to scrub this up right now. Okay, I've got this cleaned up. Maybe a little difficult to see in the camera, but some of that nickel plating has definitely come off, and you can just see copper colored metal underneath there now, and that's what we want to solder onto. And let's be safe. If you have any like little chunks of metal or anything in there, I just have a little bit of flux wash. I'm just going to give it a little spray just to wash any of that stuff out, just because I don't want little medical particles floating around the inside of my connector, as you can imagine. Maybe just a little spray of compressed air or something like that. I just think the fluid does a good job of cleaning that out. So now that's done, let's get this in the vise and get this soldered up. Okay, so I have my broken one. Hold on. I have my stupid broken one in here. Like I said earlier, if you can see, that solder doesn't just want to stick to it. See how it just kind of balls up and it just spreads out and it doesn't really wet. You don't ever want solder to ball up on something like that. Now I have cooked these just because I'm kind of curious, and I think if you generally eventually put enough heat, see this one won't. Again, see how the solder, it just wants to ball up. You absolutely do not want that ever when you're soldering. It should wet out and it should just flow over the whole surface. Okay, so that's the one I didn't clean. This goes in the trash. Here's the one I did clean. And you'll see a pretty big difference here. So now, flow some solder into this. Some heat. Okay. This will soak up a lot of heat. Okay, now see how the solder, it spreads out and it wets. It doesn't ball up. It just will even itself out over the whole surface. That's what you want. That's a clean part. That's going to be a good joint on there. So again, don't skimp on that when you're doing these. Maybe you get one where you can actually kind of get a joint, but it's not going to be solid. And even if you do get a little ball of solder stick, usually the first time you just knock it with something, that's going to come right off. Okay, so now with that, I'm going to take a look at my prep length. Red conductor is going to go on the tip. Oops, red connector is going to go on the tip. The clear one is going to go on the ring. And I want to make sure I take my outer PVC jacket here, and I want this to come all the way up to pass both of these strain relief bumps or divots, or whatever you want to call those. So with that in mind, you don't need very much on this one at all. That's going to be quite short. This one, I want a little bit past the edge of the tab, and I'll probably go just even a little bit shorter than that on the shield. Nice and tight. And I'll strip and tin these. Make sure you get all the individual strands of copper together. Nice little twist before you do this. You always want to control your materials. Just going to do the end here. The thing about grounds, no matter what you're doing, don't tin them all the way back, because this all just becomes very stiff because of the solder on it, and then it goes into the rest of the spiral of the braid, which doesn't have it, and that's actually going to be your weak point. And if it ever slips past the strain relief, that's going to be the first point where it's going to want to break. So I always just I always just tin the end of this and leave this flexible down here at the base. So now, if you look at the way this is going to be oriented, I have my conductors coming up like this, and you see I have this really, really long shield on here that's a little bit close to my ring tab on there, and I don't want that to ground out. So, and normally this would just get cut incredibly short, but the distance between the strain relief and the ring tab there's not a ton of room to work in there, so I'd rather just run it up. But if I ever do that, I want to take precaution. I'm just going to put a little bit of heat shrink on there. This is 1/16, or you can use 3/32. I just trim this down like so. Leave enough of that out. Shrink that on. Now, if you want to get really clean on this, which I do, you always notice whenever you do this, you always have a little bit that's still exposed down here. And I think I did this when I was doing the DB25 video. I'll always bring up another piece, the heat shrink, and I'll make sure that's covered up. That's 1/4 inch heat shrink, and this looks just about right for what I need. Okay, so we'll fit everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tab, I'm going to bend it up a little bit. I'm going to take this tab, I'm going to bend it up a little bit. It's just going to make it easier to thread my conductors in. Maybe just give these a little bit of a bend up. You can bend these pretty far. It's very rare that they break. Yeah, that looks okay. Then if you think it's too high, where the cover is going to come down, it's going to hit it, you just push it back down a little bit after you get your conductor in there. And just push those down flush. And again, my shield is coming up, and it's definitely over an area that I cleaned. So I should get a good joint there. Now that should be good, and this is really what I want, because when I come in with the soldering iron, I don't want anything moving around. Don't want to be in a position where, well, I'll hold the cable with these two fingers and I'll bring the solder in with these two fingers, and you don't want that. Get your cable in, get everything secure. Then when you bring the soldering in, one hand on the solder, one hand on the iron, put the solder on, and that's it. And then your connector is attached permanently. That's what you want. You don't want stuff moving around while you're soldering. If stuff is still just a little loose on you, you can always get just a little clamp, or just like a little bread tie thing, and you get this stuff at the dollar store. Also, if you look at these little helping hand kind of things, which I hate, you can always just take one of these off, and I'm going to use this in just a I'll do it now, stick it on, put that on to hold my shield flush up against the body, because it's kind of flying out there a little bit. Okay, so now everything is exactly where it needs to be. My heat shrink and even my outer jacket on PVC is coming up well past the strain relief. I'm getting a good amount of overlap on everything. And another thing I did not mention, if you look at the way I actually ran these conductors through the holes in the tabs, I'm always running them away from the body. Because a lot of times if you take these, like especially this one on the ring, if I were to take it from the top and feed it down, there's always a chance if I strip that too long, it could have gone down, it could have hit the body and shorted out. You can always get under there with like a small blade type screwdriver or something, and just bend that up, make sure to keep it away. But I always like to see the end of the conductor if I can, because then I know that it's not touching anything. And also, if you notice, the outer jacket on those conductors, it's running all the way up to the tab. So you don't have any exposed copper anywhere except for what's just about to get covered in solder. So now 3 simple solder points. That looks good. That one looks good. Again, give my iron a second, just come back up to temperature because this body does soak up a lot of heat. Float quite a bit in there. Give it a second, and there you see it flowed, wetted nicely, and that's that. And that's your assembly. I've got 3 nice shiny joints, no exposed copper anywhere. And now, like I said, I'm going to bring in my other piece of heat shrink and slide it all the way up there. And this is just so I get some better strain relief. And that's that. So let's assemble it. Assembly is a simple matter. Just get your installation tab down there in place. Back cover on. Nice and tight. That's it. That is your GLS RA TRS plug, which I probably don't recommend, but here we are. Couple other things about this. I brought this other piece of heat shrink down really far. You don't really have to go that far. Some people really like to see that heat shrink on there. They think it adds extra protection and against bending, because this is usually where cables break, is right here where they come out of the plug anyway. Dress this up however you'd like. If you do want to make a Y cable or an insert cable or something like that, I have tried 2 pieces of Mogami 2314 or like a Canary CS4. This is the really thin unbalanced stuff. I did talk about how large this cable opening is here. You can actually get 2 pieces of cable up there, like I said, the 2314 or the CS4, if you want to make those splitter or the Y cables. So with that in mind, I hope you learned something. I hope this is helpful. If you did find it helpful, please hit that like and subscribe buttons, and I will see you next time.